The first thing we have to do is to release this nut because the backing plate installs onto these 4 bolts right here that attach to the transfer case. And then this will be attached to the emergency brake drum. To get this nut off, it is a 1.1/8" socket. Use a breaker bar and we'll put this on the nut. We want to make sure the transfer case is engaged, or in other words, in 4-wheel drive. So when you spin the rear here, the front spins as well, and this will help us in taking this nut off. So I'll just use the universal U joint right here and put it on to the end right here, like that. Thread the nuts on, like that, and with those nuts threaded on, that will help us use a big crowbar right here, and we'll wedge the crowbar into U-joint right here. Just stick it in like that. And now when you unloosen it, it'll spin this thing this direction, which will see it'll put pressure down onto this crowbar like that. So when you unloosen this now, all you have to do is just stand on the crowbar and this nut will come off very easily. Stand on the crowbar, kind of hold the transmission down at the same time, and then give it a good push. Behind the 1.1/8" nut, there is a washer, so that has to come out next. To get yourself a 4-inch gear puller, that works very well. Just set it up so it will pull this right off, and there's a little indent right there, so the puller sits in there very easily. I would just set it up with only 2 pullers on it at an angle, and it seems to work very well. And now you just tighten this nut right here where my finger is. Like that, and it just falls right out. And that's how you get this apart, and now it'll make it easy to put the emergency backing plate on. We recently purchased a brand new emergency brake backing plate, and this will be installed on to these 4 bolts right here. First, we'll take the 4 bolts off, put the backing plate on, and then screw these 4 bolts through the backing plate back into the transfer case and torque them up, and the backing plate is installed. Use a 9/16 socket and just unloosen these bolts. The top left-hand bolt, when the transmission is orientated upside down, is a 3/8, 3/4 inch long bolt, coarse thread. Make sure you know which bolt goes where, because there's actually 3 different lengths of bolts in these 4. The left-hand bottom bolt in our orientation, 3/8 coarse thread bolt, but it is a 2¼ inch long bolt. These 2 bolts are actually the same, and they are 2½ inch long. They are the same threads and same size. They're just a little bit longer than the other bolt. As you can see, it is a 1/4 inch longer, and this bolt and this bolt are the same length. As you can see, these 2 are 2½ inch long. This one is 2¼ and this one right here is 3/4 in length. 4 bolts cleaned up. Now put the lock washers on just to get it all ready to go. Before we install the emergency brake backing plate, it's important that we install the emergency brake lever on first. If you don't install this on first, you can't get it on later when the emergency brake is installed. But first thing I would do is just re-thread this thing, and it's a 3/8 24, so it's just fine thread. Give it a quick spin here just to make sure it threads nicely. With this thing threaded nicely, now we can put the emergency brake lever on, and this is what the emergency brake lever looks like. But first you want to make sure we put some just general purpose grease on this stud with some multi-purpose grease. And also coat the under part here as well, because that's where the lever will ride on. put on the emergency brake lever pointing this direction with the longer end pointing in towards the transfer case and with the angle pointing upwards. So you just slide it on to the stud right here, like that. Give it a quick wiggle, get the grease worked in there. Now you'll put a washer on top of this stud right here, but I would just put a little bit of extra grease on this part right here because this is where it's going to ride on. Then you put a 3/8 washer on and then a 3/8 fine thread nut, thread it on. It'll just be hand tight for now because we'll have to adjust the tightness and put a cotter pin in. So you have to check back from our video of how we install the cable linkage, and then we'll get this thing tightened down and the cotter pin secured. You want to make sure you orientate the backing plate with this rectangular hole towards the emergency brake lever, and you just slide it on like that. There's a close review of the emergency brake backing plate, and it's orientated with that rectangular hole facing upwards, and all the holes line up perfectly. Now it's time to install the bolts. The reason why the 2.5-inch bolts are used on the right side in your guys' orientation is because it has to go through the thickness of the emergency brake shoe adjuster. So it has to go through the 1/4-inch thickness. That's why these two bolts are longer than the left-hand bottom one right here. Now, but you have to make sure you install this while you put the backing plate on, because the bolts that hold the backing plate on actually hold on the emergency brake shoe adjuster as well. So orientate it the correct direction. This hole right here on the back is actually used to bolt onto the emergency brake backing plate, and also helps to hold the emergency brake shoe adjuster. So orientate it the correct direction. It'll be this direction, like that. Before you install these bolts, you want to make sure you use a number 2 gasket sealant, because these transmissions, and transfer cases are pretty prone to leaking, and these old Jeeps seem to be always leaking. So to try prevent more leakage, we're going to put some gasket sealer on these 4 bolts, and we'll just use this right here, Permatex number 2 Forma gasket. So just load the bolts up with the Permatex gasket sealer. Make sure you guys use the correct length bolt for the right-hand side that holds the emergency brake shoe adjuster on. So make sure you use the 2.5-inch length bolts. So with the correct orientation, stick them through the holes and start securing it. The 2.25-inch bolt goes in this left-hand bottom corner. And the 3/4-inch length bolt goes in this top left-hand corner. Use a 9/16 ratchet and socket here, tighten these bolts up. As per the manual specs, it says to use a torque wrench and torque it between 25 and 35 foot-pounds. So I will have it set to 30 foot-pounds to be kind of in the center and just to be safe. And there you have it. All the 4 bolts are now properly torqued. A little trick to clean the bolts off with this gasket sealer, use some acetone, and it gets the sealer off like really easy. I'm going to take you guys around to the back of the emergency brake backing plate and make sure to install this one screw right here that goes into the emergency brake shoe adjuster, and it's just a fine thread 3/8 bolt with a lock washer. All you do is just thread it in. Now just thread it in until it is hand tight. And that screw is actually very important because it actually holds on the emergency brake shoe adjuster. That is how to install the emergency brake backing plate